So what I'm going to try to cover here is how do we start modeling walls? But before we could actually start modeling walls, we need to understand two very kind of key things. One is what is a wall, and two, what are location lines? Okay. The reason why this is important is because one of the things that makes Revit so powerful, or any BIM model so powerful, is that it is extremely precise, right? So if I want to build a wall, it's not as just as being general as, oh, I want to build a wall right here. Revit is going to ask you, what is that wall made out of? Are you going to have drywall? Are you going to have wood paneling? What size of drywall are you going to have? Are it going to be 1/2 inch? Is it going to be 5/8? Are you going to do 1/4 inch? And what's going to happen on the other side? And what about your studs? How wide are your studs? Are you using 2x4s? Are you using 2x6? Is it going to be a CMU wall? Is it going to be a metal stud wall? Right. So it's going to ask you all of these questions, which can be very daunting to most people at the very beginning, especially because most people who are just starting off with Revit have very little experience, have very little construction experience. So when we ask, well, what is in your wall? Many people kind of shrug and say, I have no idea. So we are going to start off by just drawing and beginning to understand what is a wall and what kind of goes into a wall. Now, there are hundreds of different types of walls. We are just going to keep it very simple and very basic for right now. And we're just going to talk about your very general interior wood stud wall, right? Now, in most homes, that's what everyone has, okay? Some walls, some of the newer constructions are made out of metal studs, but even that construction is still very similar to wood framing, okay? So let's assume that the nearest closest interior wall to you, okay, is a wood stud wall. So, in other words, let's go ahead and just quickly, let me draw in here. So let's say this is you right now. Here's our floor. And let's say you're at a desk. Forgive my drawing. I'm not the best drawer. But let's say this is you. Okay. What we're going to take a look at is that wall. Okay. Now, at this wall, we're going to go ahead and start here at the bottom. Okay. Now, at the bottom, let's zoom in over here. Yeah, actually, no, let me delete this. I take that back. Let's delete that too. All right. At the bottom, we have a piece of wood. Okay. And this piece of wood is, let's call it a 2x4. Okay. It's a 2x4 piece of wood, which is known as your bottom plate. Okay. Just for the record, in construction, we can use a 2x4, and where it's placed in the construction, whether it's vertical or it's horizontal, whether it's at the top of the wall or the bottom wall, or if it's in a roof, we have different names like bottom plate for every piece of wood. Okay, but they're all going to be 2x4 pieces of wood. But if it's on the bottom, if it's at the bottom of the wall, then we call that a bottom plate. If it's vertical, if it's standing vertical, then we'll go ahead and call that a stud. Now, a stud, I think, is probably the most common term of all, right? We all kind of understand what a stud might be. Now, your studs, okay, are spaced out 16 inches, what we call 16 inches on center, okay, or 16 inches OC. Let's do one more over here. This continues on, okay? So the stud is a 2x4 at 16 inches OC, okay? and your studs are vertical. Now, at the top of your stud, you have another 2x4. Okay, that runs at the top. So we'll go ahead and bring these studs all the way up here to the top. And we actually have another one. Okay, and these two kind of overlap one another. Right? Actually, whatever. Now these two here are known as your double top plate. Okay. So in the wall, okay, in your wall over here, you have your bottom plate, followed by your stud, your 2x4 stud, that is placed 16 inches on center. And then you have your double top plate. Okay, and that's the wood portion. Now then what they'll come and do is once the framing is in, they'll come in and they will apply the drywall, and they will screw in the drywall. Okay. They put your drywall up, and then they tape it, they mud it, and then they paint it. Okay. And what we see over here is the drywall. Just like this. Okay, let's go ahead and call that drywall. Now here's the thing. In construction and in Revit, we actually don't call it drywall. It's called gypsum, or gypsum board, or for short, gyp board. Okay, now this is important because this is what Revit calls drywall. Okay, so whenever you see gyp board or gypsum, understand that that just means drywall. Okay, so that's what we end up seeing, and that is typically what is in your standard interior wall. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side, and you have drywall on the other side. Okay, so that's in your typical interior wall. What about an exterior wall? Well, it's going to be similar. Okay. In your exterior wall, we're going to have your bottom plate. Okay. Now we're not going to draw foundations, and we're not going to get into that right now, but we will later on. So we have your bottom plate. We have our stud. And let's say we'll also have our double top plate. Oops. Let's go ahead, and so we have our studs. Okay. And on the inside, we would go ahead and have our drywall, right? So that's what's happening on the inside. But let's say this is the wall that on the other side of this wall, right? Like on the other side over here is the exterior side, right? This is the interior side. This is the exterior side. We'll do the same thing over here. This is the interior side. And let's say this is the exterior side. Now, the exterior side is going to vary quite a bit, okay? And this is where things get a little confusing based on what it is you want to have on the other side. Are you going to have stucco? Are you going to have wood siding? Are you going to do brick? What are you going to put on the other side here? Okay, and so this is where it kind of differs. But typically, let's just go with the stucco wall, right? Because stucco is probably the most common exterior material. So in stucco, what they'll do is you end up buying, we end up placing a 3/4 inch, or sometimes actually 1/2 inch plywood sheeting. Okay. So let's call it 1/2 inch plywood sheeting. Okay. If you want to know what this looks like, just Google it. And then after that, you have your stucco. Now the stucco gets placed into it kind of takes 3 coats. Let me put that in a different color, actually. It takes 3 coats to create the stucco, but we won't get into that. What matters to us is that the stucco ranges about 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. That's how thick that stucco is. So let's say it's 3/4 of an inch. Okay. So what we would end up seeing over here, let's get back to this guy. Well, you know what? I put that gypsum in there. Let's see if I could delete all that. I'm just gonna have to redo that. Okay. So we have the line there. Not quite sure what happened there. Okay. So we have on the exterior side here, we're going to have the 3/4 inch plywood sheet, sorry, the 1/2 inch plywood sheeting. And then we're going to have the 3/4 inch stucco. Right? Just like that. So that is what happens, and that's what's going on inside your walls, right? And over here you would have the drywall that you end up painting. Okay. Why does all of this matter? Well, what we need to do, let's see here. What we want to do here is, let's look at this. So all of this matters because in Revit, when we start building walls, the first thing that we're going to be asked is, where do you want to start your wall from? From which point? In other words, do we want to start our wall? Let's see if I can zoom in here. Do we want to start our wall from the stud? Do we want to start our wall from the drywall? Or do we want to start our wall from the other side of the stud? Or how about from the stucco? Okay, because it all matters, right? And this is what we're learning, or what we're going to be covering. This kind of question here, Revit refers to as the location line. In other words, when we build our wall, which location do we want to start from? Which location point, which location line do we want to start from? So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. Now, location line is probably the most critical and fundamental thing you need to learn as just the foundation of Revit. Okay, so do not move forward until you understand location line. I have students who just kind of rush through this process, and then halfway in, their models and their drawings are all wrong, and they have no idea why, and it always has to do with the location line. So let's go ahead and draw our interior wall in a plan view. Okay, now when we say a plan view, what we're talking about is if I was to cut this wall and look down, okay, and typically these plan views are cut 48 inches or 4 feet off of the ground. Okay, that's what we would call a plan view. And we'll get into this also later in the courses. Now, just since we're talking about plan, this view is known as a section. Okay, so we have plan and we have section. So this is a cut. Okay, it's a vertical cut through the building. So if I was to draw this interior wall in plan, what I would see, no, sorry, let's take a look. Let's go this way instead. Okay, so this interior wall, if I was to cut through this, looking down, well, what I would see is my studs. You know, I don't want to confuse people. Let's just keep it the same colors. The studs, right? There's 16 inches on center. I would see the bottom plate. Right? I would see this guy right there. I would see the drywall on this side, and I would see the drywall on the other side. Right? That's what I would see. Now, what we don't show when we're doing drawings is actually the studs. Because can you imagine having to draw a rectangle every 16 inches on a single floor plan? It would take us forever to draw that, right? It would take a very long time. So when we do drawings, we actually just assume that the studs are inside, okay? Because that's a given. So what you would actually see is this. This is a plan view of our interior wall, okay? Now, let's learn the names of each part. Revit calls the stud area, right? This area here. This is known as the core. Okay. Now, it is very important that you learn and memorize the names, these parts of the wall. Okay. Not for construction reasons, but it's important for Revit because Revit refers to these all of the time. So it's important to understand what is what. So in the core, right, or sorry, this center part here is known as core. Okay. Now let's say this is the interior side. This is the exterior side. Okay, we were talking about this before. Interior side, exterior side. Well, in a regular interior wall, they're both really kind of interiors, right? Because on the other side maybe is the bedroom and on the other side is the dining room. So technically they're both on the interior side. However, Revit needs an exterior side. Okay. And in most cases, the other side of a wall might actually, I don't want to say most cases, but in some cases, the other side of the wall is different. So what we're going to do, so let's go ahead and keep it as exterior. Okay. Now Revit calls this point here. Let's go with green. That point right there, this line right there. This is known as core face interior. Okay, go ahead and erase this here. Because it's the face of the core, right? And it's on the interior side. So that would mean that this here is called the core face exterior. Okay. Now we also have the finish side here, right? Now, when we say finish, what we refer to is the final finished material. So essentially the material that you see, okay? So going back to that wall, that interior wall, the drywall, that the drywall would be the finish material. So we would call that the finish side. So the side that the thing you can actually physically touch is a finish. Okay. So this would be called, oops, this would be called finish face interior. And that would mean that this would be called finish face exterior. Again, this is an interior wall, and this might be a little confusing, and that's okay. This will make more sense when we start talking about exterior walls. Okay, or at least this part here is going to make more sense when we talk about exterior walls. Okay, so these are the four kind of common location lines. So when we go in and we say, what's the location line of, or we have to create a wall with this location line, this is what we are referring to. Now, let's take a look at that exterior wall, because there's two more location lines that we need to look at. Okay. And it makes more sense when we're looking at an exterior wall. So let's go ahead and draw a plan view of an exterior wall. So we have the core, right? So we're not going to draw in the studs. Go ahead and type this in. Actually, you know what? Let's not. Then we have on the interior side, we have the drywall or the gypsum board. You know what? Let me have a tendency of drawing really small. So let's try to get this a little bit bigger. Okay, so there's your gyp board. Now we said on the exterior side, we have plywood sheathing, and then we have the stucco. Okay. So what we'll notice between these two is that one side has a thicker exterior side than the other, right? So if we're talking about 1/2 inch, oops, and 3/4 inch, over here we're talking about 1 1/4 inches, right? That's how thick that exterior side is. Whereas drywall, maybe it's just 5/8, right? And so this would be 5/8, and this would be 5/8. Okay. So the point here is that it's thicker on one side, right? It's thicker on one side than it is on the other side. Now that creates something unique. Whereas, take a look over here. Let's get a bigger line. From one side to the other side, the center of the wall is going to be actually right down the center of the core, right? Meaning my distance from the center of the core there to there is going to be the same distance from there to there, because everything is equal on the others on both sides. However, when we're talking about this, if we're talking about the center of the wall, well, the center of the wall is actually somewhere over here. right? Because it's thicker on the exterior side. So if we wanted this to be equal, that would mean that the center of wall is actually not the same as the center of the core. Now, both of these would be the same over here on this side. So the center of the wall and the center of the core, oops, are exactly the same thing because we have the same amount or the same kind of thickness of materials on either side. So that's the same. But in most cases, right, we're actually going to end up having more content or more material on one side of our core than we are on the other side. So Revit has created two additional points, one known as the center of the wall and the other one known as center of core. Okay, so in all, we have 6 location line points. We have the finished face exterior side, which is also here. We have the core face exterior. We have the center of wall. We have the center of core. We have the core face interior. And then we have the finished face interior. Okay. So those are the 6 different parts of a wall in regards to Revit and how Revit recognizes the 6 different points. Now, why does this matter? Okay. Let's say I'm building a wall, and it's an exterior wall. And put it in here. This wall so you're gonna have to give me a minute to actually draw the wall. So we have the core face exterior. We now have the core face interior. And then we have the finished face interior. This is why all of this is important, okay? Because this is where most people make a mistake. So let's go over here. Let's say this wall is 20 feet wide. Okay, so in other words, from this wall to this wall, it's 20 feet. The question is, where is it 20 feet from? Is it 20 feet from finished face interior to finished face interior? Is that 20 feet? Is it 20 feet from finished face, or sorry, from core face exterior to core face exterior? Or is it 20 feet from finished face exterior to finished face exterior? Right? So which one is 20 feet when we model this? This is why it's important to understand the location lines, because what will end up happening, and why the very first question that Revit asks when we build a model or when we build walls is, where is your location line? And this is the most common mistake. A student will come in or someone will come in and not set their location lines. And if the dimension says it's 20 feet from interior to interior, right, interior face to interior face, what they'll end up doing is not set the location line correctly, and maybe they set the core face to core face interior. And so they'll run and they'll create a wall, and they'll click right here, and they'll go all the way across and click right there, and they'll say, okay, that has to be 20 feet. And Revit will draw that as 20 feet. Then they go on and they model everything out, and then they go back to do the final dimensions, and you run a dimension in Revit, and it turns out that it is 20 feet. Oh God, what is it? 1¼ inch. And then you go, wait, I drew this correctly. I drew this to 20 feet. Let me erase this and do it all over again. And they'll go in and they'll click and click and realize that it's not 20 feet. Okay. And so the point is that, or the reason why that happens is because you did not set, or someone didn't set the location lines correctly. Okay. Because within this wall, we could have 20 feet from there to there. We can do, you know, I'm not even gonna be able to do this math in my head, so I'm not even gonna try. Yes, I'm gonna try. So that's, you know, no, that's 20, I don't know, 3.5, 7, I don't know, 20 feet, 8.25. Or the dimension from there to there would end up being, I don't know, 20 feet, 10 inches, something like that, right? And from here to there might be 20 feet times from there. Now I'm just getting messy. Okay. But the point being that it is imperative that when you start modeling, you make sure that you set the location line correctly, meaning you set the location line to whatever dimension it is that you want to dimension to. If you have a set of drawings already there with you and that have drawings, I'm sorry, that have the dimensions, then take a really close look and see where is the dimension coming from. Are the dimensions on the floor plan going from interior wall to interior wall? Or are the dimensions sometimes, and oftentimes actually, we'll do a dimension that goes from, let's say, interior wall to the other side of the wall, right? So sometimes our walls are from interior, finished face interior to finished face exterior, okay? So sometimes we end up having to do something like that. So it's very important you take a look at the drawing and see where is the dimension taken from. If you don't have a drawing, then just be consistent and say, okay, all of my walls I'm going to measure from core face interior to core face interior, okay? And just be consistent so that all of my dimensions, and you know, when I go in and I say, hey, this wall needs to be 20 feet, I know that I'm referring to 20 feet from stud to stud, right? Core face to core face, or finish to finish, okay? So make sure that you're paying attention to where that location line is and how you're kind of modeling, or as you're modeling, making sure that you have the correct location line throughout the entire kind of model, okay? This is imperative. This is what you need to know, because if you can imagine, if you set the wrong location line, if we forget about setting the location line, and you go off and you model an entire building, and you didn't set the location lines correctly, then that means that this wall might be off, or this wall might be off, or a wall inside the building is going to be off, okay? So that's why it's really important. You're gonna bang your head against the wall if you make this kind of mistake, okay? So now what we're gonna do is just go into Revit and see how we actually kind of create this wall and see how these location lines come to play.